When I was a kid, my dad used to take me on trips to the Czech Republic. Having worked in the Eastern Communist bloc, I guess he couldn't help but take regular trips there. And then, of course, there is the added bonus that in the early days after the collapse of the Communist bloc, stuff was really cheap as fuck. You could buy an entire box of Samson beer for €2, roughly $3. And believe me, those Czechs make a damn fine brew. I have a lot of childhood memories, consequently, from family trips to Krumlov and Budvičke, and I try my best to visit these places as often as I can too. One of the things I remember most was the speakers that were at almost every street corner, even in a town as small as Krumlov and Budvičke. These large speakers that were there were always silent, and it wasn't until 10 years later when I watched a documentary about North Korea that I realized what their purpose were. They existed to constantly quack communist propaganda non-stop from the early morning hours to late at night into your face, no matter if you were just doing your groceries or trying to enjoy an evening in a cafe. The glorious communist socialist utopia was in fact just a low-quality speaker system drowning out public life, intruding into every sphere of socializing activities. It must have been an almost absurd existence, living in a place where political discourse had been eroded to a bunch of phrases and buzzwords that you could only escape through the privacy of your home and which were constantly blasted into your face non-stop without a pause. But in a certain and weird way, this absurd and nightmarish scenario is repeated today by those who have nothing to add other than repetitive behavior. The only difference is that it was mandated in Czechoslovakia. However, in this video, I'd like to take your time to talk not just about the practical means by which authoritarianism is enforced. I want to talk about one of its binding agents, one of the properties of specific ideologies and beliefs that binds them into becoming violent, repressive, and authoritarian, something that at the same time can also be used against authoritarian ideologues to bring them to their downfall. I want to talk about nonsense, about gibberish, about things that don't make any sense when you look deeper into them, or don't make any sense when you look at them at first glance. One of the things I remembered from my childhood trips from the Czech Republic with my father was visiting art galleries and this specific painting. Now, certain self-proclaimed cultural connoisseurs amongst us who believe themselves cultured for eating pizza at Pizza Hut with a knife and fork would look at this and decry it as nonsense. They would see it as nothing more but gibberish, no message whatsoever, just a bunch of badly painted naked men and women with ice cream and yellow dots. However, this painting by the Slovak painter Jaro Jelinek is far more relevant than any hyper-realistic sculpture that a Paul Joseph Watson or Prager would praise. It's an act of resistance against the socialist Czechoslovakian regime, and the title might make it clear: Eating Ice Cream with the Assistance of the Secret Police. The figures in the background symbolize society going about basic social interactions, things as banal as eating ice cream. The yellow spots in the foreground represent the all-surveilling and all-intruding looks of the secret police. It is a representation of the society that Jaro Jelinek had to live in, the society of constantly quacking loudspeakers and all-surveilling secret police. A society that had every single aspect of social life disrupted and distorted. This could have just as well been a mere painting of a bunch of people eating ice cream. Instead, the figures are distorted and misshaped, with the wide-open, distressed eyes in discomfort even during such a casual activity as eating ice cream. And the yellow spots representing the omnipresent oppressive Czechoslovakian state further distort the image, making it hard for us to see what is going on and what the true social life within the socialist regime is like. The painting is distorted and misshaped because the society it represents is distorted and misshaped. There are no natural interactions within an oppressive regime amongst people, is the meaning of this painting. And in that lies the power of nonsense, because to the obsessive authoritarian, obsessed with the aesthetic of their own regime, this is just pure gibberish with no message. And even if capable of seeing the message within the painting itself, throwing a tantrum over that message and over the painting consequently would make them look ridiculous. And that is a theme you will find throughout many paintings done by Czech and Slovak artists during the Czechoslovakian socialist regime, especially after Soviet tanks had crushed the Prague Spring. The Prague Spring was a brief era of liberalization in the Czechoslovakian regime, started by the General Secretary Alexander Dubček in the 1960s, a reform package Dubček called Socialism with a Human Face. The result of it was a flourishing in cultural expression and in economic success through allowing small businesses and giving more freedom to artistic expression. The most popular artist in Czechoslovakia during that time was Marta Kubisova, and especially her song Modlitba pro Martu. I'm probably butchering the name and the title. It's a ballad encouraging the people to forget all hatred and envy and to regain their self-determination. However, the Soviet Union didn't approve of the liberalization and what came of it, and on the 20th of August 1968, Leonid Brezhnev ordered the Warsaw Pact to invade Czechoslovakia, overthrow the government, end Dubček's socialism with a human face reforms, crush all resistance, and restore Soviet control. You have probably seen many images and videos of this historic event, when Soviet tanks rolled through Prague, crushing young unarmed Czechs beneath them. The famous picture of a Czech Holocaust survivor putting on his old prison clothes and standing before a Soviet tank. The blunt force with which an ideology proclaiming to be the ideology of the people had to subdue its people by force. People like Marta Kubisova were forced to end their music career, and an entire generation of young artists who had experienced and lived freely for 3 years of their lives were forced to live under an oppressive regime. And it was through that the Czechs and Slovaks developed an artistic resistance against their regime that was unique in the Eastern Bloc. The new Czechoslovakian regime tried to dictate to its people what entertainment is, such as mass sports events called Spartakiadas, where thousands of athletes would do mass physical exercise under horrible polka music. Artists like Jaroslav Dolček reacted to it by making movies mocking these events for the ridiculous mess that they truly were. You might have heard of the rock band The Plastic People of the Universe. Founded in 1968 in Czechoslovakia, it became a nuisance for the regime by hosting illegal concerts with music that the state authorities didn't approve of, eventually leading to the arrest of the band's members. But not content with that, one of the most popular TV shows of that time, a cop show titled Major Semana, that was directed under the control of the Interior Ministry, aired an episode about, and I kid you not, a terrorist rock band terrorizing Czechoslovakia.
Tak prý hlášku ještě zas jednou opustí.
One has to imagine millions of Czechs and Slovaks turning on their TVs at evening only to collapse into uncontrolled laughter as they watch a police detective, in all seriousness, hunting a terrorist rock band. The regime had been reduced into nonsensical actions due to being driven into being obsessed with comedy and entertainment that often had little to no meaning or was meant to be critical of the regime in a way that would make it look ridiculous if they went after those mocking them. The realities were still sinister to the very end of the regime. The novelist Václav Havel was constantly surveilled 24 hours a day, even during such mundane actions as walking his dog. And throughout the 70s and 80s, one can see within the art produced during that time period a theme of how what some would call nonsense was used to mock the regime. These distorted paintings with their weirdly deformed depictions of characters and scenarios look absurd at the first glance, as if they were pointless gibberish. However, they were meant to be distorted, grotesque and deformed, as they depicted and mocked a society that was ruled by cruel, vindictive and paranoid people who had through their rule deformed society into something grotesque. Nonsense is powerful. Doing nonsensical things with the intention of mocking the powerful and reducing them to being upset over nonsense, thereby reducing them to clowns, is an extremely effective tool. I remember during the early 2000s when neo-Nazi marches were common occurrences, one of the protest movements that sprang out into existence to counter this was the Front of German Apples, a movement about rejecting foreign fruits in favor of superior German apples that would go to neo-Nazi protests to, well, pretty much appeal for genetically pure and superior German apples right next to a neo-Nazi rally. and of course trying to get these people to be upset over it, which was the intention of the joke, since there is nothing as absurd and ridiculous as getting upset or even angry over a joke. One other more recent such example would be the Clinton campaign and liberal media being reduced to complaining about a little green cartoon frog as if it were an imminent threat to democracy and freedom. However, the main point to underline here is that absurdity in these cases is used to make an entirely serious point, to bring across a very serious message. The people using this nonsense know fully well that many of the things they do seem nonsensical. What I have talked to you about throughout the past several minutes is something that most of you already probably know fully well. However, I wish to take a few minutes of your time to speak about a different kind of nonsense instrumentalized within a political sphere that has a far more sinister side to it. Have you ever taken a stroll through social justice communist Twitter? Gen, queer, fat, socialist, feminist, cis lady type, she, her, definitely not 6 cats in a hoodie. Gay anime communist on the west coast of Norway, born and raised, queer, anarchist, NB, trans girl. If you want AIDS, go look at this account. Anti-gamer, anti-anime, and anti-sectarianism, hashtag Kahina Rangers Squad, General Secretary of the Irish Socialist Bath Party, American region. Forever seeking little goth fotties, not racist, horny left, pro-universal annihilation, extremely communist, lewd yet lazy draw friend, 18 plus not safe for work. Down with the bourgeois Free Planet Alliance, glory to fully automated luxury gay space communism. A World of Warcraft universe genome, historian, Marxist Luxembourgist, presumably at large, anti-fascist internet partisan, proud American Jeremy Corbyn enthusiast. Sharia Bolshevism. Queer, NB, they, them, nerd, communism is good. Actually, liberals stole feminism from anarchists. This one has an amazing Tumblr blog about gassing Slytherins and complaining about being 25, living with her parents and not getting a job, and how all of this, her being unemployed and living with her parents at the age of 25, is the fault of capitalism. She also has a patron. Look, I'm poor and depressed and capitalism is garbage. I sometimes start projects and never finish them. Hopefully, money will help me finish them. If you, for some reason, my arguments or insights are good, a buck or two would be nice. I might actually be able to make and sell my products. You can literally give that person money for doing absolutely nothing besides tweeting about how Chris Reagan is a Nazi, tweeting about how she wants to take away your private property, and tweeting at ANCAPs that she wants to kill them. Married gay Islamic Marxist Leninist Russophile fighting capitalism, imperialism and bigotry with @PLSWeb, the Twitter account of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. Married gay Islamic Marxist Leninist. That flag in the background, by the way, is the flag of fully automated luxury space gay communism. Yes, that's a thing, and you can search for it on Twitter or Tumblr in case you want to mock it. I guess it is really easy looking at all of this to take this as nothing more than a joke. Twitter account after Twitter account filled with nothing but demented nonsense and gibberish. World press blogs on how communism is about what you can do for me and my feelings. Blog posts about how tweeting this nonsense is the cultural Marxist, for the rich. We have nothing to lose but our own collars. Yes, this is a furry Marxist sign. The furry fandom has entered a political singularity from which there is no return. The material conditions of the world are such that the political divisions between the forces of the radical left and reactionary right will cleave even our humble fandom down the middle. The world has entered a period of upheaval in which the very foundation of the world economy will be fought for and against. The contributors to this magazine have chosen their side, the side of liberation. This magazine, the Cultural Marxist, exists to quantify and qualify this upheaval as it shapes our fandom for the generations to come, provide context to the struggle, and place it within the frame of a larger world. As the furry fandom inevitably rips itself in two over our place in the larger world, whether to be radical or reactionary, this magazine is your guide in the struggle for our fandom's future we will all unwillingly become part of. Well, since the furry fandom is being split in half, I wonder if there's also some fascist furry magazines somewhere out there. What all these people with their different flavors of nonsensical word salad have in common is that they sincerely believe in most of the things they proclaim on their social media accounts and protest rallies. They are not attempting to disguise some grand critique of oppressive social structures through gibberish, but have gibberish at the heart of their ideological mind map. And this is where nonsense can turn into something very sinister. I recently started reading Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies again, and in the chapters critiquing Marxism, Karl Popper points out that internal inconsistencies and contradictions within an ideology or set of beliefs consequently force an ideologue into being abrasive, hostile, and even outright violent towards all those who in any way would seek out to critique their beliefs. In other words, if you believe in something that would be obviously nonsensical to the wider public, the only way you can ever defend your views is by being hostile and oppressive towards the wider public, by generating a cult mentality of in and out group that sees the out group fundamentally not just as some mere opponent on grounds of disagreement, but as an enemy to everything you stand for and to yourself. Nonsense is a binding agent in the political sphere. For those who propose it will have to stick together to defend it from the examining eyes of the outsider. And this is something that can be found throughout many ideologues and regimes throughout our history. You might have heard of Alfred Rosenberg, one of the chief ideologues of the Nazi Party, who wrote the book The Myth of the 20th Century, which was intended as a basic ideological and philosophical guideline into National Socialism. In it, it claims that the Germans were the descendants of an ancient race of giants who lived in the Himalayas, who migrated to Persia, founded ancient Persian civilization, and then migrated to Greece after ancient Persia was degenerated by Jewish influence, subsequently founding ancient Greece, and after Greece was degenerated by Jews, they migrated away into modern-day Germany. Many Nazis believed that the mythical city of Atlantis was actually a Germanic metropolis from the ancient era in the Baltic Sea that was destroyed by heavenly powers for the crime of race mixing with Jews. Himmler gave his SS cronies pamphlets with maps of what he believed were ancient and medieval battle sites, and instructed those SS men to have sex with their wives at these sites during full moons, so that if a child would be conceived, it would reincarnate an ancient Germanic warrior spirit. He believed that the planet Earth was in fact the center of another hollow planet, and instructed physicists across Germany to prove this dribble. Then, of course, there is world ice theory, which rejects atomic theory and proclaims that the universe is made of ice. Debunked at the time of its conception, this pseudo-scientific esoteric gibberish was still held onto by many high-ranking officials within the Nazi regime. It would be easy for anyone using Google to debunk this nonsense in our modern day and age, yet it is the aggressiveness and violence of the Nazis which I believe were also in part a result of the simple fact that they believed in nonsense. Imagine standing on a political podium and proclaiming that we are the descendants of a race of giants from the Himalayas who lived on a planet that is the center of another hollow planet. You would be laughed off the stage, unless you had a gang of brown-shirt goons to kick the teeth out of anyone who dares to laugh at you. At the core of an ideology that makes nonsensical gibberish part of its doctrine, there evolves a narcissism out of the awareness that one would usually just be laughed at, and consequently the knee-jerk reaction is to be brutal and spiteful with all those who either point out or just laugh at you and your nonsensical ideas. However, the consequence of not calling out gibberish should be made very clear, and the best example of it is Lysenkoism. Trofim Lysenko was a self-proclaimed biologist in the Soviet Union who rose through the ranks of the Communist Party through political means and not through scientific findings. One of his proposed theories rejected Darwinian theory and proclaimed that similar species cooperated and have solidarity amongst themselves. In essence, what he proclaimed was that there is proletarian solidarity between barley and wheat. A total of 3,000 scientists who called this theory out as nonsense were arrested and even executed due to Lysenko's connections with Stalin, and when Lysenko became the unquestionable god of science within the Soviet Union, his nonsensical ideas were put into reality and caused a massive famine. The consequences of having nonsense unchallenged are therefore devastating, and what I will add to that is that those who proclaim nonsensical gibberish and market it as the savior of society to usher in a glorious age or even an utopia are themselves inherently vicious and brutal, and that this applies very well in what we deal with in our societies today. Pure gibberish, such as the notions of there being over 50 genders, the idea that you can change from a man to a woman merely through feelings, that all white people are racists, and so forth, defended with consistent educate yourself and other condescending gibberish as if the proponents of nonsense were somehow keepers of some hidden truth that we are simply too dumb to understand. What Karl Popper referred to as the conspiracy theorist replacing the past religious prophets is also applicable here. A search for short, easy and compact solutions and explanations to the world's problems, for hidden truths that are revealed through simplistic dabbling rather than concerted effort into research. In short, a cult mentality where the cult and the cult's leaders and doctrines must under all circumstances be protected. For if the doctrines are revealed to be nonsense and the cult leader is a fraud, the entire cult collapses into nothing. The censorship, the slander, the backhanded character assassinations, the deplatforming, all of this, what we see here today, the mentality that spawned all of this, in my opinion, has a lot to do with knee-jerk reactions by narcissists who can't stand the thought that someone would stand up to the things they have invested so much into and simply state that their emperor has no clothes. Nonsense can be an incredibly toxic drug within an ideological doctrine, one that leads to the vicious behavior that we see these people engaging in today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. And maybe, if possible, consider becoming a patron or making a one-time donation via PayPal. Links in the description.